Hi, it's Katrina. Number 7. The Gilgamesh Connection. What if your favorite heroes from history all came from one original inspiration? What if Hercules, Perseus, Odysseus, and all the ancient mythical warriors were carbon copies of one another? It's a popular theory, one that scholars believe could be relatively true. Ever since the Stone Age, humans have been regurgitating the same heroic fables over and over again. For example, take a look at the bizarre connection between Achilles and Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the legendary hero from ancient Mesopotamia. His name first appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, written by the Sumerians about 5,000 years ago. Achilles appears in the epic poem The Iliad, written by Homer around 2,700 years ago in Greece. And interestingly, despite the monumental differences in time, place, and language, the heroes and their stories are nearly identical. Gilgamesh and Achilles were both the sons of mystical beings and mortal men. Gilgamesh's father was Lugalbanda, the king of Uruk, and his mother was the goddess Ninsun. In the case of Achilles, his father was also a mortal king, King Peleus, but his mother was a magical sea nymph named Thetis. Having a bit of magical blood made both men stronger, wiser, and better looking than the competition. In both epics, the mothers take very good care of their sons. Then they convince other gods to watch over their children, while the heroes grow and perform supernatural deeds. Gilgamesh and Achilles begin their stories as arrogant and selfish men. Gilgamesh is particularly brutal as the ruler of Uruk, demanding that all newlywed women visit his bedchamber. Both heroes also have a single best friend, who sadly dies along their journey. Both heroes have dramatic scenes in their stories in which they mourn the loss of their dead best friend. Gilgamesh refuses to perform the funeral rites for his friend Enkidu, and Achilles does the same thing for his friend Patroklos, refusing to allow his body to be burned or buried. The endings of the stories are also eerily similar. Although blessed with divine blood, Gilgamesh and Achilles each die as mortal men. In essence, the tales are about what it means to be human and what it means to question existence. They may not be identical heroes, but you can certainly see the connection and the recurring themes in each story. And now for number 6. But first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Cindy Butler and Sans Freilich for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries or dinosaurs or historical coincidences. We've got it all. Number 6. The Grieving Mother. At the turn of the 15th century, Michelangelo traveled to Venice, continued to Bologna, and ended up in Rome. He lived there between 1496 and 1501 AD. During that time, he created a magnificent sculpture in a side chapel at the old St. Peter's Basilica. That sculpture is known as Pietà, and it was carved beautifully from marble. It shows the Virgin Mary draped in rags holding the lifeless body of Christ after he was crucified and removed from the cross. This was after his death, but before he was placed in his tomb and resurrected. It's one of the 7 sorrows of Mary, one of 7 important life events for the Virgin Mother. This statue is extremely similar to other statues that have been made since the beginning of human civilization. Just about anywhere you look around the globe, you'll find detailed sculptures of a woman holding either a dead man or a lifeless infant in her arms. It might not seem unusual until you look at the positioning of the statues. Most of these sculptures are obviously copying one another. From Michelangelo to ancient Serbia and from the island of Sardinia to Iran, the statues of the Grieving Mother have been produced for thousands of years. On the island of Sardinia, 3,000 years ago, somebody carved a small bronze figurine of a mother seated with what appears to be a deceased child. Although it's ancient and not at the artistic level of Michelangelo, the parallels are striking. The Sardinian figure was crafted by the Nuragic civilization. They dominated Sardinia for almost 2,000 years before Roman colonization, and yet they left no written records of themselves behind. The only way scientists know what their culture was like is because they've studied the evidence. Evidence like statues, shattered temples, and ruined palaces. This is only one example of a Grieving Mother figurine. Other depictions date back to 3000 BC in Iran, and even older ones from 5000 BC in the Balkans. Another strange thing is that the older the figurines are, the more they resemble non-humans. Not to say that they look like aliens, but they kind of do. Some of them have weird eyes and reptilian-like features. Perhaps these sad statues were not humans and were meant to represent the life of a goddess. And to a small few, these figurines represent ancient aliens. You know I had to include that. Number 5. Stone Circle Enigma. Why did prehistoric people build stone circles? What do you think the point was? From the farthest corners of Scotland's remotest islands to the wastelands of the Middle East, strange stone monoliths from prehistory still stand. The most famous is certainly Stonehenge, but it's hardly the only one, and it isn't even close to being the oldest. According to Alan Hale from Scientific American, some of the earliest stone circles ever found were discovered in Egypt. Yes, Egypt, not England. Standing stones in the Sahara Desert have been dated to around 7,000 years old. And the experts think these desert stone circles are the oldest astronomical megaliths in the world. They were built long before Stonehenge, yet they look nearly identical. It's like the builders of Stonehenge got the blueprints from whoever built the stone circles in Egypt. Scientists have been studying these circles since the word archaeology was invented, and they still haven't been able to come up with a definitive reason for why the stone circles were made. But they do have a lot of solid ideas. Some stone circles were used partially as burial grounds. They often work as calendars, aligned with the sun, the moon, and the solstices. Ancient people were clearly trying to track the stars using giant stones. Many scholars even believe the stone circles were early observatories, but that still doesn't explain why so many of them were built. Nor does it explain why almost every civilization came up with the same technique. There are over 1,000 stone circles scattered across West Africa, built between the 8th and 11th centuries AD. These were likely funerary monuments, but they still look identical to the stone circles that have been found in Europe. In 1998, American archaeologists found a stone circle in Miami, Florida, and another one was discovered in New Hampshire, suggesting that Native Americans also built stone circles. It's like the pyramids. Sure, critics argue there are only so many shapes that ancient people would build their structures out of, but it still seems weird that cultures around the world focused on building huge pyramids. It's just as bizarre as countless cultures obsessing over building circles of stone. Number 4. The Phoenician Sarcophagus. If you were to take a look at the Tabnet sarcophagus, you'd likely think it came from ancient Egypt. The sarcophagus is an amazing piece of workmanship, crafted during the 5th century BC. Egypt was in its 26th dynasty at this time, with its power near its peak. The Egyptians were so mighty and their pharaohs so influential that Egyptian customs slowly started to spread across the world. You could call this the Americanization of the Bronze Age, only it was Egyptization, which isn't a real word. The Tabnet sarcophagus doesn't come from ancient Egypt. It was built by the mysterious Phoenicians 2,500 years ago. The man buried inside it was Tabnet, the priest of Astarte and ruler of Sidon. He was a very influential king who adopted the practices of the Egyptians. The coffin was originally found in 1887 by U.S. Presbyterian minister William King Eddy. The lid was cracked open and the mummy was pulled out. Tabnet had been preserved in a concoction of oily brown fluid. Amazingly, though, his body was in terrific condition. Parts of his corpse had decomposed, but a lot of it was still okay. Even his vital organs were still preserved in his body. The Phoenicians did try their hand at mummification, but never really bothered to remove the organs as the Egyptians did. Sadly for modern scientists, people in the 1800s didn't really know what they were doing with mummies. They exposed the mummy to sunlight and it rotted, leaving nothing but bones. This is a great example of how similarities can spread across the world without any kind of alien intervention or divine insight. Egypt was a massively popular society. Their culture and traditions spread into other parts of the world simply by them being so influential. The Egyptian-style sarcophagi from Phoenicia is an excellent example of that. If it were an option, would you like to be mummified upon your death? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Number 3. Hercules and Jesus. If all the heroes of the world are copies of even older heroes, doesn't that mean that Jesus Christ was also a copy? There's a particularly interesting theory that says Jesus was based partially on the legendary Hercules. As a side note, most scholars also believe that Hercules was a real person from the Stone Age. They think he was a great warrior whose story was passed down through countless generations. And if you want to follow that logic, you could say that Jesus Christ was, at the core of it, based on some unknown hero from the Stone Age. But let's look at the more modern tale of Hercules for comparison. Hercules was born from an earthly mother who was impregnated by a god, and in his case, his father was Zeus. Throughout his life, Hercules had some awfully suspicious familiar titles. He was known as the Savior and the Good Shepherd. People called him the Son of Man and the Prince of Peace. He also performed great labors that were considered miracles. And upon his death, Hercules ascended to the peak of Mount Olympus in the form of a spirit. He was the son who became a spirit to join his father in the heavens. Maybe this sounds like a reach, but these are all the same buzzwords that you find with the story of Jesus Christ in the Bible. There are some other coincidences in the story of Hercules. In one legend, Hercules defeated a serpent who was the guardian of the golden apples, and the serpent's name was Ladon. He was a giant evil snake that was protecting precious fruit. Although it's not exactly the same, you can definitely see the parallels between Hercules' serpent and the serpent that tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. But was Jesus Christ really based on Hercules? The answer is likely not entirely. The story of Christ shares a lot of similarities with not only Hercules, but also with plenty of other stories from Greek mythology. So Hercules was likely based on even older heroes before the idea of Jesus Christ was ever thought up. Number 2. The longest day. Every single civilization of the ancient world had a unique way in which they celebrated the summer solstice. It didn't matter how advanced or primitive the culture was, they always celebrated the longest day of the year. This was a universal thing that continued until extremely recently. In ancient England, the Celtic high priests, also known as Druids, led ritual celebrations during the middle of the summer. In the world of the ancient Greeks, the summer solstice was seen as the first day of the year. They launched grand festivals, including one called Chronia. While the Druids led bizarre ceremonies in stone circles in the middle of the woods, the Greeks gave praise to the god Cronus. They suspended the social code and allowed everyone to go nuts. Slaves were released from their bonds so that they could party. It was a big deal for the Greeks, as the summer solstice also marked the 30-day countdown to the Olympic Games. In ancient China, there was also a party going on. The summer solstice was a time to honor the planet. Chinese tribes gave praise to femininity and celebrated yin. Yin was celebrated in summer and yang was celebrated in winter. The Chinese were extremely into the duality of the universe. Native American tribes also took part in midsummer rituals, and some of these are still practiced today by the Sioux tribe. The only real outliers are the Maya and the Aztec. Archaeologists are fairly certain they celebrated the summer solstice, they just aren't sure how. The Maya and Aztec built their temples and public buildings to align perfectly with shadows cast during the summer solstice. But what kind of events took place? Nobody knows, but probably a lot of sacrifice. Number 1. Noah's Egyptian family. In the biblical tale of Noah and the flood, God sent a deluge to destroy the planet. The only life that's saved is a pair of representative species from all the animals in the world, as well as Noah's family of 8. There are a few interesting connections here. The first big connection with Noah is that his story was told thousands of years before it was written in the Bible. The people of Mesopotamia told almost the exact same story, even mentioning the same species of birds being released from the ark's window after it landed. There really is no debate that the flood story was written by the Sumerians and Babylonians first. But there's another bizarre connection that you don't often hear about. Noah's family of 8 may be based on the 8 primordial deities of ancient Egypt. They are known as the Ogdoad, or the Eightfold. They appear in the earliest historical records of Egypt. The 8 primordial deities, 4 pairs of husband and wife, were worshipped by cultists starting over 5,000 years ago. That was prior to the creation of the pyramids. This is really interesting because scholars believe the 8 original deities were thought of as the 8 original creators. In the Bible, it's the 8 people on Noah's Ark that were responsible for building the human race back up after its devastation. And Egyptologist David Silverman said the 8 primordial deities represented the basic qualities of everything, such as water, darkness, and infinity. Researcher Gavin Cox said the Egyptians believed the Ogdoad were responsible for maintaining the balance of creation, And after the flood, which was also part of the earliest Egyptian myth, the Ogdoad kept the water from drowning the world again. In the same way, the 8 people on Noah's boat were supposed to prevent humanity from being purged by God a second time. Even the names are kind of similar. The main Ogdoad was Nu, which isn't a perfect Noah but does sound similar, and in ancient Egyptian, the name Nu means watery abyss. That's yet another clue that Nu and the story of Egypt's Ogdoad is directly connected to the biblical narrative of the flood. What do you think about Egypt's early gods being connected to Noah's family? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Bye!